Most people think of ancient spiritual protection as a matter of primitive superstition. When we look back at early religious history, we picture amulets, magic words, wooden crosses, and passive believers praying for an invisible shield to protect them from invisible demons. We are conditioned by centuries of institutional teaching to believe that faith was the only mechanism at play, and that physical objects of protection were nothing more than psychological crutches for a world that did not yet understand science. But that is not the only way to read history. And when you look closely at the texts that were deliberately hunted down, criminalized, and erased from the official narrative of Western civilization, a completely different, highly sophisticated reality emerges. In a Coptic Gnostic text, buried deep in the Egyptian desert near Nag Hammadi, around 370 AD, and hidden from the world for over 1600 years, there is a detailed description of an entirely different kind of spirituality. It describes a private meeting between Jesus and his closest disciples. This was not a public sermon for the masses, not a parable delivered on a mountaintop, but a private, highly guarded transmission of functional knowledge. In this specific account, he does not hand them a symbol to worship. He hands them a functional, physical tool. He describes a specific material, worn at a precise location on the human anatomical structure, designed to interact directly with the invisible forces operating around them. For centuries, institutionalized religion systematically replaced this profound, functional knowledge with jeweled icons. They introduced objects that look visually holy, but carry zero functional frequency and no bioelectric resonance. The institutions taught the masses to rely entirely on intermediaries, priests, and towering cathedrals for spiritual safety. They created a monopoly on divine connection. But the earliest followers of these underground teachings were not passive churchgoers. They were initiates. And an initiate, by definition in the ancient mystery schools, is someone trained in the absolute sovereignty of their own energy field. What was buried in the desert sands, and what we are going to unpack mathematically and biologically today, is not folklore. It is ancient bioenergetic engineering. We are going to look at the exact elemental metal specified in these suppressed texts, the profound physiological and neurological reason it was meant to be worn precisely at the neck, and how this understanding transforms the concept of spiritual protection from a passive religious belief into a measurable, logical mechanism of physics. Definition first. To understand why a specific elemental metal matters, you must understand exactly what it is interacting with. In the Nag Hammadi library, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and various suppressed apocryphal texts, there is constant, urgent reference to hostile spiritual forces, most frequently called Archons. But we need to define this term outside of medieval mythological frameworks. The earliest texts do not describe Archons as physical monsters hiding in the dark, waiting to strike. They describe them behaviorally, as parasitic frequencies. They are described as forces of inorganic intelligence that feed on specific human emotional emissions. Think about this logically and biologically. What is the fundamental architecture of any parasitic relationship in nature? A parasite requires a host whose natural defenses are compromised, whose energy is scattered, and whose internal environment is hospitable to the parasite's survival. In energetic and bioelectric terms, an archon is a low-frequency state of resonance. It is the manifestation of prolonged fear, chronic shame, deep-seated guilt, and the specific, crushing despair of feeling entirely disconnected from any higher source of clarity. These emotional states are not just abstract, poetic feelings. Modern biophysics and neurocardiology tell us that human emotions carry highly measurable electromagnetic frequencies. A human being locked inside prolonged fear generates a very specific, erratic, low-frequency electromagnetic field. The heart rate variability becomes chaotic. The nervous system becomes locked in sympathetic overdrive. A human drowning in chronic shame operates with a severely suppressed energetic output, emitting a signal of defeat. These are the exact states described in ancient texts as dark attachment. They are harvested states, Because a mind trapped in a low-frequency neurological loop cannot access higher cognitive clarity, and a body trapped in that same loop becomes spiritually, mentally, and energetically exhausted. It becomes a battery that is constantly being drained by its environment. Therefore, true spiritual protection is not about chanting the right words or attending the right building. It is about field stabilization. It is about maintaining a coherent, high-frequency electromagnetic signature that a low-frequency force simply cannot attach to. You cannot attach a low-frequency receiver to a high-frequency broadcast. The physics of resonance do not align. A stable field repels an unstable force automatically. This brings us directly to the tool of the ancient initiates. The definition of spiritual armor in these esoteric texts is not a metaphorical shield of blind faith. It is defined literally as a conductor of divine light, a physical material chosen for its exact, measurable ability to bridge the body's living bioelectric field with the stabilizing frequency of the earth and the immediate environment. So, how did humanity lose this profound understanding? How did a highly logical mechanism of self-sovereignty become replaced by passive religious dependence and obedience? The misunderstanding formed through deliberate, calculated, systemic erasure. In 325 AD, Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea to standardize an empire-wide religion. The goal was political unification through spiritual conformity. To build a massive global institution, you must, by necessity, eliminate individual self-sufficiency. If a human being knows how to stabilize their own energy field, how to access deep spiritual clarity directly without a script, and how to protect themselves from low-frequency interference without the aid of a priest, a ritual, or a temple, that human being cannot be controlled. They cannot be taxed. They cannot be frightened into compliance. They do not return every single Sunday, bowing their heads, waiting to be told what is true and what is false. Because of this threat to institutional power, the initiate knowledge, the understanding of human bioelectricity and energetic sovereignty, was immediately categorized as heresy. Texts were hunted down and burned. Teachers were executed. But a few small groups of initiates, knowing the sweeping suppression was coming, took their most vital operating manuals, sealed them carefully in hardened clay jars, and buried them deep in the dry, preserving sands of the Egyptian desert. When these texts were finally unearthed in 1945 by a local peasant looking for fertilizer, they bypassed the censors of history. They revealed the precise, unedited mechanics of what the initiates actually practiced. And the core of this energetic mechanism revolves around one specific element on the periodic table: copper. Why copper? Why not gold, which was considered the most precious and divine metal? Why not silver, which was associated with the moon and purity? To deeply understand the mechanism, we have to look at the chemistry and quantum physics of this specific element, because the ancients understood its functional properties long before modern science possessed the instruments to measure them. In 1947, another massive historical discovery occurred at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among hundreds of texts written on fragile parchment and animal skin, archaeologists found one artifact that completely defied every academic expectation: the Copper Scroll. It was not a text written on a piece of metal. It was hammered out of pure copper, shaped into sheets, and rolled into a cylinder. The people who created it looked at every single material available to them in the ancient world and made a highly conscious decision. For their most critical, high-level, paradigm-shifting information, only one substance was permanent enough and alive enough to hold the transmission. In ancient Greek, copper was called chalkos. In Coptic Christian mystery schools and ancient Egyptian alchemy, it was referred to directly as the living conductor. Gold is incredibly dense. It hoards energy. It stores it, but it does not easily facilitate flow. Silver is highly reflective. It bounces energy away, which is useful for deflection, but it does not ground or stabilize a living circuit. Copper is entirely unique in its behavior. It receives, it conducts, and it perfectly stabilizes energy in a continuous, uninterrupted, living flow. Let us look at how this mechanism actually works on an atomic level. Copper possesses something that sets it entirely apart in the periodic table of elements. It has a single, free electron in its outermost atomic shell. This single electron is unpaired. It is highly mobile. It is permanently available and permanently responsive to external stimuli. This is not mystical, abstract language. This is fundamental, undeniable chemistry. Because of this lone, wandering electron, copper exists in a perpetual state of energetic readiness. It is always awake. It is always available to move an electrical current the absolute millisecond a current is introduced to its surface. Now, let us look at the host, the human body. The modern medical establishment spent centuries treating the body purely as a chemical and mechanical machine, a complex system of plumbing and levers. But modern biophysics, championed by heavily suppressed pioneers like Dr. Robert O. Becker, proved irrefutably that the human body is fundamentally a bioelectric organism first and a chemical organism second. Your entire nervous system is an incredibly complex electrical grid. Every single beat of your heart is triggered by an electrical impulse generated by the sinoatrial node. Every thought that crosses your physical brain, every memory you recall, every emotion you feel is a literal bioelectric firing of synapses. Dr. Becker's research even proved that before the body heals a wound chemically, it sends an electrical current of injury to the site to organize the cellular repair. Electricity dictates the biology. Your heart generates an electromagnetic field that is mathematically thousands of times stronger than the brain's field. This torus field extends several feet outward from your physical chest into the space around you. You are, quite literally, a walking, breathing, broadcasting electromagnetic field navigating through other electromagnetic fields. Furthermore, the Earth itself generates a baseline frequency. It pulses at roughly 7.83 Hz, known in physics as the Schumann resonance. It is the planet's own stabilizing electromagnetic heartbeat. Copper, by its very atomic nature, naturally resonates within this exact grounding frequency band. When you introduce pure copper to the human bioelectric field, you are not simply putting on a foreign, inert piece of jewelry. You are introducing a highly efficient, living conductor that speaks the exact same electrical language as your central nervous system. The mechanism is profound in its functional simplicity. The copper acts as an energetic bridge. It takes the erratic, scattered, stressed bioelectric output of a modern human body, and it helps harmonize it with the stable, infinite grounding frequency of the Earth. It closes a bioelectric circuit that modern living has broken. But in any complex system, a circuit is only effective if it is connected at the correct, precise junction. And this is where the precision of the ancient suppressed texts becomes truly undeniable. The initiate texts did not simply suggest carrying a piece of copper in a pocket or wearing it on a finger. They were highly specific, almost clinical about the location. The living conductor was to be worn continuously against the skin, specifically at the throat, resting directly at the base of the neck. If this were merely ignorant superstition, any location on the body would suffice. A ring, a bracelet, a belt. But from an advanced anatomical and bioenergetic standpoint, the neck is the most critical, highly trafficked, and vulnerable physiological junction in the entire human body. First, consider the gross anatomy. The massive carotid arteries run straight up the neck, bringing the closest, most dense flow of oxygenated blood directly to the surface of the skin. Blood is essentially salt water. It is a highly conductive physiological fluid, carrying your body's specific bioelectric pulse, your unique living signature. Placing a highly conductive metal directly over this massive arterial flow means the copper is in constant, uninterrupted resonance with your core physiological rhythm. It is tapping directly into the main biological power line. Second, and perhaps most importantly, the neck is the primary pathway of the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the absolute superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system. It connects the brain directly to the heart, the lungs, and the gut. It literally controls your body's ability to shift out of the sympathetic fight or flight stress response and return to a state of calm, coherent, biological stabilization. When a person is under severe energetic or psychological attack, when they are flooded with fear, anxiety, or environmental toxicity, it is the vagus nerve that is completely overloaded and suppressed. Ancient Egyptian mystery schools, Sumerian texts, and early Gnostic Christianity consistently referred to the throat as the gate of the living word. It is the precise anatomical threshold where the internal, invisible reality of the mind crosses over into the external physical world through the vibration of speech. It is the literal junction point between the analytical intellect of the brain and the emotional resonance of the heart. In any engineered system, whether it is biological, electrical, or structural, junction points are inherently the most vulnerable areas. They are where the gap exists. They are where two different systems meet. And in the realm of frequency, gaps are exactly where external interference enters. By placing the single most conductive, frequency-stabilizing elemental metal precisely at the body's most vulnerable physiological and energetic junction, the ancient initiates were not performing a primitive magic trick. They were engineering a highly targeted bioelectric shield. They were creating a continuous, stabilizing feedback loop right at the gateway of the central nervous system. So, what are the real-world effects of applying this ancient understanding? What actually changes when you entirely reframe your view of spiritual protection through the lens of physics and bioenergetics, rather than passive, fearful faith? First, it permanently changes your relationship with your own emotional sovereignty, especially in the modern world. Today, we live in an unprecedented soup of artificial electromagnetic frequencies and a relentless 24-hour cycle of psychological stress designed to harvest our attention. When you understand that low-frequency forces, whether you view them purely as psychological traumas, toxic environments, manipulative media, or literal esoteric spiritual entities, really entirely on your personal field being scattered and weak, the entire game changes. You realize that you do not need to fight the darkness. You do not need to constantly battle anxiety. You simply need to stabilize your own bioelectric frequencies so highly and so consistently that the lower frequencies can no longer find a purchase point. An energetic parasite cannot attach to a coherent field. It is a physical impossibility. If your nervous system is grounded, if your vagus nerve is supported, and if your bioelectric output is stabilized and rhythmic, the erratic frequencies of fear, guilt, and environmental manipulation simply bounce off. They pass through your field without finding an anchor to hook into. Second, this knowledge completely eliminates the need for an external intermediary. The greatest, most profound effect of this suppressed knowledge is absolute spiritual and energetic independence. The texts discovered at Nag Hammadi were hunted down specifically because they removed the middleman. When you understand that your physical body is the ultimate temple, that your central nervous system is a highly tuned antenna, and that the earth has naturally provided the exact conductive elemental materials necessary to keep that antenna tuned to absolute clarity, everything shifts. You no longer need an institution to grant you permission to speak to the divine. You no longer need an authority figure to validate your spiritual safety. You become a true initiate of your own life. You move away from being a passive, fearful recipient of dogma, quietly hoping that someone else's prayers will keep you safe in a chaotic world. Instead, you become an active, conscious operator of your own energetic architecture. The ancient initiates knew that the physical skin is the ultimate interface. They explicitly documented that an object worn over clothing does not complete a circuit. The skin is exactly where the body's internal electricity meets the external physical world. When pure copper rests directly against the skin at the base of the neck, over time, a profound synchronization occurs. It begins to carry the specific bioelectric signature of the wearer. It becomes a literal extension of your biological field. This is precisely why the ancient texts strongly advised against sharing the conductor with another person. To introduce a second, entirely different biological signature into the metal is to break the quantum coherence of the established circuit. The ultimate effect is a human being who can walk into a heavy, toxic, or utterly chaotic environment and remain completely, unshakably anchored internally. You have likely experienced this contrast at some point in your life. Think of the days when every minor inconvenience shatters your peace, leaving you drained and exhausted. Now contrast that with the days when you feel so internally grounded, so fiercely present, that the chaos of the world simply flows around you like water around a stone, without ever penetrating your core. That is the exact difference between a scattered electromagnetic field and a highly coherent field. The historical suppression of this specific knowledge was a calculated, structural move to keep humanity functionally scattered. Because a scattered human is a dependent, easily manipulated human. But a coherent human, a human whose energy field is stabilized, grounded, and independent, is a sovereign force of nature. The truth that was deliberately buried in the Egyptian sands for 16 unbroken centuries is finally returning to the surface. It is returning right now because modern science has finally caught up to ancient wisdom, providing the advanced vocabulary of quantum physics and neurobiology to explain exactly what the initiates understood through direct, lived experience. Spiritual protection is not a myth. It is biology. It is quantum chemistry, and it is the highly conscious application of frequency. The tools have always been here. The instruction manuals survived the burnings. If this deep dive breakdown helped you see the hidden mechanics behind our suppressed history, and if you value a deeply logical, actionable approach to reclaiming your spiritual sovereignty, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We will continue to decode these ancient texts, not through the lens of blind superstition, but through the rigorous mechanics of truth. Until next time, stay grounded, maintain your coherence, and never stop questioning the official narrative.